There are times in everyone's life where they're pushed to the brink, and it's in those times where you can truly see the character of an individual. Some will fall to the wayside in their weaknesses, while others will abandon their values for the security of safety. But some will stand strong, even if it costs them everything. Adios releases on Steam and the Microsoft Store for $19.99 on March 17th, 2021. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the PR group Posthorn PR for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion in the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Those Googling for a review on Adios and are not just seeing this come across their subscription box were probably drawn in by the game's story hook. You play as a farmer in Nebraska who has connections to the mob. In the promotional material, it's very specific about what those connections are. That dead bodies are chopped up and fed to the farmer's pigs. That's how they get rid of the, people who need to go away. Despite the fact that the game is pretty forward with this, it being literally the second scene as you throw what seems to be wrapped up beef to pigs, it's actually not strictly said in the course of the game that you're explicitly doing this. In fact, you may just think you're throwing some meat to the pigs, even if you're really wondering what's the deal with the guy in the suit. If you didn't read the Steam store page, you may be confused a little bit. And this set the scene for a game that conflicted me from the get-go, as I found myself questioning a lot of the decisions made when it came to the elements of Adios, but not necessarily saying they were outright bad choices. See, I feel like the story would have been a lot better served without being that explicit with what work our farmer did for the mob, and leaving it more generic and allowing the imagination to run wild. In fact, there's several cases where you might have been convinced that he did other work for the mob at some point through the other stories in this game, and it would have added to what the game is going for. In fact, let me be clear from the get-go here. Adios is not a crime drama in the traditional sense, or a surprising series of twists and turns serving some overall mystery. Don't expect a winding tale from a Danganronpa or Phoenix Wright game here, or the cheesiness of a mainline horror title like in the Little Hope franchise. Adios at its core is a character study of a conflicted man that has a lot of heartache, a lot of baggage, and is a breakdown of how one man is expected to handle all of that when his world is crumbling around him. The idea here is that you are putting yourself into the shoes of another man and walking a mile in them. And that comes directly from the game's writer, Doc Buford, who's also known for his efforts in games like Paratropic. Why I say I'm conflicted on that story segment in particular is that I get it. I get why the story is specified in the store page and promotional material. You need that hook, that mob and pigs and farmers, to draw people in to even get interested in your game, or hell, even to watch this review. If I just say it's a story of a conflicted man and the world around him, no one's coming to this. No one's actually going to buy the game. So I get it, you needed that in order to get people to buy your game regardless of quality. And the fact is, it may not have served the story in the big picture, but it was a necessary evil even if I think the game would have been better for it. Nevertheless, the story has you as the farmer interacting with an obvious hitman that seems to be your, contact per se. You'll go about your day with the hitman doing your daily chores, milking the goats, feeding the pigs, subscribing to a certain reviewer's channel to see more reviews like this. Subtle, I know. And shoveling the shit. Literally. Each of these activities lead to small side stories that reveal certain parts of the farmer's life, whether it be a past story of his family or of himself, or the current situation that he's been placed in and the conflict that arises from it. Sometimes you'll do a small task that will require some basic interactions with the world, but sometimes you'll just be able to look around and, well, just listen to this story. But it all serves the game's main plot point, that the farmer is done with being a tool for the mafia and the consequences that come out of that decision. I want to emphasize that the strongest part of the game, the reason to play the game in the end, is the down-to-earth yet complex writing surrounding the character of the farmer. I'm really impressed with Doc's writing here, as the writing is that sort of salt of the earth with relatable stories and tales of relationships and connections of the past, yet does it in a way to still intrigue you and make you wonder how the situation came to be. There's a lot of smart choices in the construction of the story, like how our main farmer and hitman, the two main characters, never actually get a name. And that's purposeful, I think. They are the vessels that make you think about the story in question. You're supposed to, go a mile in their shoes. Yet when it comes to others in the stories, those that you meet and those you don't even, they explicitly have names. The farmer's wife, his son, the associate of the hitman. It all serves a purpose to have you see the solid connections between them, but not feel like you're being someone from the sidelines. In the era of things like Doki Doki Literature Club and Danganronpa, I feel like subtlety when it comes to visual novels gets overlooked by a lot of people, and that's right to a certain extent. Certain subtlety is very, very hard to pull off when it comes to writing because it either clicks or it doesn't. You either get it or you don't. And to make it accessible to a bunch of people, you really have to have a mastery of the language that you're working with. The fact is, I think Adios does that with this story. It's not necessarily the most 4th of July-ish. It's not going to blow you away in that case. But when you go and, step away from the game after you've played it, you start to think about it. You start to wonder, maybe there was more detail that I didn't necessarily see the first time around, and you do come back to it and maybe think about it and play it again. And that's a great story in a nutshell, that it keeps you thinking about it. Here. The slow yet slight southern drawl of our farmer is the highlight of the performance, and I'll be looking at future projects done by its voice actor, Rick Zaref. His ability to add emotional hesitation and imply emotion not strictly said in conversation is fantastic. And there's a powerful performance in the last act that will bring you to the edge of tears. It didn't get me over the edge like some other games, but it came really close. Meanwhile, our hitman is stoic, and what you'd expect from an emotional black hole needed in the syndicate crime field. Yet there's enough charisma to make you think he's someone who can convince the farmer at certain points not to do this. And the key times where he does show emotions or hint at emotion is well done as well. Another great performance, this time by DC Douglas. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about.
It is lonely. Heartbreakingly lonely. To know everyone else you ever loved has passed on. So, I look after him and he looks after me, and I don't know. Sadie and I, we talked about being buried here,
Changed your mind?
Brody's grave was enough for me. But, I don't know. I thought about having him moved. I don't know.
You've got plenty of years left in you yet. So, what's the moral of the story? With the trees, I mean.
Be wary of outsiders.
Heck no. There are trees out there that are blight resistant. Maybe even the general here, but I'm too afraid to find out.
Now, I've given the game a lot of praise at this point, and for a lot of good reasons. It's a game that I enjoyed every moment while I was playing it, especially towards the middle part of it. But here comes the and yet part of this review. To put it mildly, those segments I discussed are solely responsible for keeping the game afloat in the big picture, because the other elements are severely lacking and drag the game down into the ocean with a pair of concrete boots. Like, the game's presentation on the surface looks okay. I mean, again, I'm not expecting the world from a small indie game, but several of the elements look passable. But in a detailed story like this, things like facial expressions and complexity in the presentation would have gone a long way in selling the story, and it just doesn't have the mustard to pull it off with the graphical choices here. Honestly, part of me wonders if this would have been better served in a traditional visual novel format, where static images could have been used to better express what was happening in the story. There was obvious influence from games like Necrobarista, with the story segments starting and some of the interesting choices when it came to the presentation, but in the end, it wasn't that effective in enhancing it. It just sort of was there. And part of that reason is that the world, it feels very static in the whole, and thus it just feels, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, dead? I get it, this is a farm, and I shouldn't be expecting a bustling city street or anything like that. But when you're in free roam, looking around, despite some good detail in the environment at times, this place feels dead. Maybe that's somewhat of the point. How dead the protagonist feels contrasted in the world that he lives in. But it doesn't help that exploring the world doesn't feel rewarding either. Sure, at certain points you can find some extra things to do, like playing records for example. But all in all, most of the actions are so simple, they can be downright boring. Sure, in the story segments you do get some more substantial interactions, like shooting skeet or even throwing horseshoes. But to be frank, they only add a small value of diverting your attention, and then you realize that you're just sort of being read a story in the end. It also doesn't help that certain segments that were used in advertising material, you can't really interact with. The bunker in particular, the weather bunker or the tornado shelter, yeah, you can't go in that, and I understand that later on they may add the ability to go in there. But when you point to it and say, ooh, look at this, and I can't do anything with it, that's gonna hurt. It doesn't help that there were a couple of bugs that really stood out. And yes, I can forgive things like a roof having a texture in the distance that wasn't exactly working. I understand that there's a specific budget here, and you may not have the resources to test everything. And specifically graphics options and graphics cards. And I can forgive being shot across the world when running around. I mean, this isn't active gameplay. Or a shovel that decided that it was a Pokemon and I was commanding it to do rapid spin. That one was actually sort of funny. But then there's ones like the phone cord. The one where I could literally have it happen on every occasion and just sort of took me out of the experience. Or when replaying the end chapter, where if I tried a second time to cook myself dinner, I couldn't get the oven to turn on, which for achievement hunting was a bit of a pain. In fact, you had to close the game in order for it to happen. But the biggest problem the game has, sadly, and one that's hard for me to overlook in the big picture, is the length of the body of work here. Quite frankly, in the current environment of Steam and indie games, an hour-long story with slight replayability for the $20 price tag is hard for me to get behind in terms of recommending the game. And look, I want to be clear. I've been one of those people who said that indie games are incredibly underpriced nowadays for the experiences you get. I don't think a solid experience of an hour or two story isn't worth $20 in the big picture. But when I compare Adios to games like Necrobarista, Enigma, I just don't think it holds up on the content end, especially with all the avenues that they could have gone by in terms of the writing here. In addition, it's not a story that you need to watch literally right now. It doesn't have that KO punch in that area, even though it has emotional moments. In fact, I don't think the KO punch would have been useful here. This is a down-to-earth story. This isn't supposed to be something spectacular in terms of, over the top. But unless you want to support this dev directly, which I can't argue with, it's hard to say that Adios as a single product stands up to the scrutiny of content. I just wanted more. And these characters are interesting enough. His, interactions with his son, things like that. I needed more of it. I wanted to learn more about his wife. And the fact that I really couldn't go around in the environments and, look at, maybe a story, that comes from the past, or, some newspaper articles about things. I wanted more lore, and that's where it failed. It just didn't have enough. It also doesn't help with the content that replayability-wise, yeah, you got the achievements there, and you can get those, but when it comes to the actual story and the actual branches in terms of when you're able to change things, nothing really feels different in the overall picture. You end up getting back to the main storyline in terms of how the discussion's going about, and the fact of the matter is, I don't think you can change the ending. Even though there is seemingly an achievement that indicates that maybe something is okay that I seemingly can't get, but if you're gonna give the illusion of choice, you gotta give me something more than this. And sadly, Adios gives me a lot without a lot in return, at least in my opinion, on the choice side. Overall, I'm strongly conflicted on Adios. I like the complex story, one that doesn't hold your hand but puts you in the shoes of a character that has a lot of emotional weight. And there were genuine moments where I really felt my heartstrings get pulled. The presentation is janky at times and doesn't exactly do the best with its resources, despite the reasonable voice acting and ambiance that come into play here. For a regular score, one that wasn't based off of buyability but quality, I struggle in terms of what to give it. But for this channel, it's a buyability score, and that price of $19.99 is a hard sell for the content that you get. When compared to other stories at that price, it's just really hard to recommend it right now, despite the good writing. But it is worth experiencing at some point. So that's why it gets a 64 out of 100, making it something to pick up on sale. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective parts of games and puts scores to them to adjust the score to your taste specifically. If you fall strongly into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see the buyability of the game, whether or not it's changed for you. As you can see, there are some scenarios in which this is a solid buy, and frankly, I do want to see this game succeed. It's just that when it comes to the consumer, I don't know if it's getting the most value for what they can experience. Anyway, thank you for watching this review. Expect another one in the next few days on Space Otter Charlie. But if you're looking for a copy of the game in terms of Adios, well, you're in luck. I'll be giving one away due to receiving a key, like I said before, and well, I want to give one away from my own pocket. All you have to do is leave a comment in the comments section below on what I can do better in these videos, or recommend a story-based game that had a very interesting premise that you enjoyed, very similar to Adios. Oh, and second, you'll need to be part of my Discord, which the link is in the description below. Which is, yeah, I know I'm trying to get more people in there, but it just makes me easy to find you. If you just want to leave after a week, yeah, that's fine. In fact, I'll give it away in a week after this review goes live. Anyway, that's it for now, And as always, keep on gaming.